Hello and welcome to Tolley Seminars Online. This is Rebecca Bennyworth and this session concerns auto-enrolment for pensions and what you need to know now as an advisor to smaller employers. Auto-enrolment commenced on the 1st of October 2012. In broad terms, it requires employers to enrol their workers in a pension arrangement and make contributions to the scheme. It's being introduced first for large employers, and small employers will join later, mainly from 2015. Note that this legislation affects workers and not just employees. Workers is a broader term than employee, so it applies to workers who are not employed, including agency workers. They're full-time or part-time, they work in the UK, and the affected people are aged between 22 and the state pension age, although that's complex too because this age varies according to how near people are to retirement age now. They must also be earning more than £8,105 a year, that is the personal allowance for tax purposes, and it's intended that this entry point will track the personal allowance for tax purposes. If people aren't earning that much, they may be able to join, and I'll talk in a few minutes about the option to join, but it's mandatory for people earning more than the personal allowance. What about directors? Director-only companies are not going to be affected by these rules unless the director has a contract of employment. So if there are no other workers or employees in the company and there is a sole director or two directors, then auto-enrolment doesn't apply to your client company. If a director has a contract of employment, then of course national minimum wage will also apply to him, as will auto-enrolment. Obviously, if there are any other staff or workers taken on, then the auto-enrolment rules apply to the company and they will have to follow the legislation. But very small companies won't be joining until 2015, so it may be some time before they're affected. Under the heading of who else may be affected by this legislation, we come to those who may join the scheme. So they need to be informed of this, but workers who may join a workplace pension if they choose to are those aged between 22 and state pension age who earn below 8105 but above LEL 5564 for the current year. Obviously, again, both these amounts will increase as we move forward, but they are expected to be aligned to both LEL at the bottom and personal allowance at the top. Or anyone aged between 16 and 22 and earn over 5,564, in other words LEL, may join the scheme, and they must be informed that they may join the scheme. If they do join, then the employer must make contributions for them. The obligations going forward, once an employer has implemented auto-enrolment, is that once the scheme has commenced, all new workers meeting the conditions must be enrolled on the date they start work. Employers will have to also review and re-enrol workers who are not members. All workers have a right to opt out, so let's look in a bit more detail at opting out. Any workers can opt out of auto-enrolment. The employer will inform them that they may opt out if they wish, but we'll have to be very, very careful with the wording of this because inducing employees or workers to opt out is illegal. However, there are some employees and workers who will definitely need to opt out if they wish to retain protection that they've already had due to changes in pension law. So some workers have got enhanced protection or basic protection from before 2006, and then other workers may have fixed protection from the changes on the 6th of April 2012. So these workers probably need to stay away from auto-enrolment and therefore will want to opt out as soon as it's available to them. There's a range of things that employers must communicate with their workers and their employees about. They must notify the date that auto-enrolment is starting, the name of the pension arrangement that people are being enrolled into, how much will be contributed to the pension, and there are minimum amounts which we'll look at shortly, how to opt out if you wish to, and then if the employer is using an existing pension scheme, then they must confirm to members and to new members that the scheme meets the eligibility criteria. Employers will also have to accept joiners who have either left the scheme or opted out, and they must accept the first such request for any worker in a 12-month period. If a worker then subsequently leaves and insists that they want to rejoin again within that 12-month period, it's up to the employer whether he accepts that or not. And as I've said before, the employer will need to review and then rejoin leavers and opt-outs once every 3 years. The commencement of the auto-enrolment scheme is known as staging, and employers have what are called staging dates. So that's the term we use for the mandatory commencement dates. Employers can bring it forward if they would like to. The first staging date is the 1st of October 2012. Employers with 120,000 or more employees will need to have commenced auto-enrolment from the 1st of October. The staging dates are set by reference to the number of employees on the PAYE scheme as at the 1st of April 2012, and employers with fewer than 100 workers will start in May 2014. If an employer wishes, they can bring forward the staging date to any date from October 12 onwards, but it's unlikely employers would want to. If an employer shares a payroll reference and actually has less than 50 workers, they will be flagged for earlier staging, but they can notify the pensions regulator and move to what their proper staging date by reference to the number of employees would be. Turning to the pension arrangements that the employer must implement, the legislation prescribes both for defined benefit and defined contribution schemes what they need to provide in terms of benefits or in terms of contribution level in order to comply with the new rules. So any employer who has an existing scheme will have to check that the scheme that they're using will comply with the auto-enrolment legislation. They may need to refer to their scheme provider or to their advisor just to make sure, and that will have to be done before the staging date commences so that they are actually ready to go. New schemes that employers start up or join to provide for auto-enrolment must meet the criteria, or alternatively employers, and particularly small employers, will probably find this the easiest thing to do, is to use NEST, which is the government scheme set up by the government specifically to cater for the needs of auto-enrolment. It's likely to be very responsive to smaller employers and to help them out with their need to make contributions and so on. So NEST is probably quite a good way to go. There's lots on the internet about NEST, and there's a cross-reference in your notes so that you can read more about the NEST scheme. Now, finally, turning to contributions that the employer will make, there is a statutory minimum level of both employer and total contribution during what's called phasing. And phasing starts with the staging date, the relevant staging date for the employer, and goes through until the final level on the 1st of October 2018. There is a chart in your notes showing the relationship between pay and contributions during the phasing period up to October 18, but essentially by the end of the phasing period the total contributions will be 8% of relevant pay between the lower earnings limit and the upper earnings limit, and the employer of that 8% must contribute 3%. But initially, all employers joining will come into the 2% total and 1% employer contribution, and that will be the level that will take them through the first phasing period. The calculation is done, as I've said, on earnings between the lower earnings and the upper earnings limits, and there are two examples of this in the notes to illustrate how the contributions are calculated. Of course, employers can choose to contribute more than the minimum, as can their employees if they wish. Well, that's probably all you need to know for now to enable you to just advise clients generally on auto-enrolment. Obviously, it will mean that those using software packages will need to make sure that their software package can cope with pension contributions, and this coming on top of RTI for some employers may feel as if they're being hit by a double whammy. Fortunately, for smaller employers, the staging dates mean that they won't actually be dealing with this for another couple of years. That's the end of my session on auto-enrolment. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.